Okay, good. Okay, thank you everyone, and appreciate everyone coming here physically and everyone online listening in. We'll give a presentation of about an hour, I think, give or take, with Q&A, and a bit more, obviously a bit more detailed than our usual 15-minute presentation. A considerable focus will be on the exciting news of the G5 acquisition and what G5 brings in. With me, we have Al Miranda, our CFO, Jason Messerschmidt, VP Sales, Natalie King, Vice President of Finance, Jason Liebert from Visimid, our older acquisition, I guess, a year and a half ago, Todd Couteau from Business Development, and Micah Morelli joining us from G5. Which way? No, other way. Okay. Yep. No, wrong way. Okay. Yep. So I'll talk a bit about the landscape and about infrared imaging. So oftentimes we talk about infrared imaging, we talk about thermal imaging. Actually, those on the webcast can probably see our video feed from a LightPath camera, coming from a Mantis camera here in the room, and can see me standing here and people seated. But we use it interchangeably, infrared imaging, thermal imaging. So I'll just explain a little bit about this without making all of us experts. Infrared being the part of the spectrum that we don't see by eye, so the longer part of the spectrum as opposed to ultraviolet and such. When we start going down the path of the spectrum from UV to RGB, meaning visible, into the infrared gets divided conceptually into four sections there. Now, the naming convention is by engineers, so it's not that sophisticated, let's say. And the first part is the near infrared. Oftentimes, near infrared, all of us know it from things like night vision or low-level imaging. That is a type of imaging where it's actually very, very similar to the visible in a lot of ways. It's the same cameras, the same silicon CCDs and CMOS and so on, image in the infrared oftentimes, which is why my iPhone camera can image in a very dark condition. It's not, even though it's an infrared part, it's not really a thermal imaging, if you would. After that comes shortwave. Shortwave is also not exactly a thermal imaging, although by technology, the type of detector and the way the image needs to be processed is much more similar to thermal imaging. Shortwave, however, is another way of seeing better than visible. Specifically, shortwave has advantages in seeing through clouds, through fog, adverse conditions. So many times shortwaves get used in maritime, so on ships or in the harbor or things like that, to be able to see in those kind of conditions. And oftentimes shortwaves get used together with one of the thermal bands, which brings us into thermal, where we play today mostly, and that is mid-wave thermal and long-wave thermal. And those are two separate thermal bands, and each of them has an advantage and disadvantage. The long wave, where LightPath has been playing until now, are uncooled detectors, which means they're much cheaper, more compact, longer lifetime. However, they can only image up to a certain distance, so usually, fairly short-range imaging, and they can only image low-temperature objects like people, things that are in the temperature range of, say, up to 100 degrees Celsius, sometimes a bit more. Midwave, on the other hand, are typically, not always, but typically cooled detectors, which makes them far more sensitive, and is a window in the spectrum in which you can typically image for a much longer range. That's why G5 cameras choose the midwave as the spectrum they use, because they can image up to tens of miles in that spectrum. And it can also image high temperature things happening, for example, an engine of a jet or inside a furnace like we do. So what we're doing today is we're really starting to cover more and more of both parts of the spectrum. The long wave with uncooled cameras coming from Visimid and LightPath, the mid-wave with cooled cameras from G5 for long-range imaging, for the more cutting-edge defense use where, cooled sensors with very low noise are needed, as well as some mid-wave imaging using our Mantis uncooled cameras, which can image in the mid-wave for very high temperature events, like in furnaces and so on. Any questions on? I promise this is the most technical I get. Okay. Why did LightPath even go into uncooled long wave or imaging, and why is there even an opportunity here to begin with? I mean, going from being a component company to being more of a system company is obviously something everyone would want to do, but it's not an easy feat to do, both technically and from a market point of view. For us, we're at an interesting point that really allows us to do this because of some things that happened and continue to happen in the market. Historically, up until around 2014, 2015, infrared imaging, thermal imaging of the infrared imaging was really almost only for defense use. Those were cooled cameras. If they were uncooled cameras, they would be very low resolution cameras. They would be extremely expensive. Around 2014, 2015, a change happened, started from FLIR with microbolometer devices. Microbolometers are the detector really for the uncooled cameras. With that, a whole market started opening up, as is often the case. When cost comes down, supply demand meet, and suddenly there's much more demand, and the addressable market is much bigger. And with that, a very gradual and nice slope of growth came to the market of uncooled imaging up until around 2019. A second step of drastic change happened as a result of COVID. During COVID, contactless temperature measurement was a key technology that was identified and needed for measuring people's fever without obviously touching, ideally, but also in mass, without a thermometer under the tongue or so on. And so thermal imaging found a really sweet application there that for a moment during 2020 was an enormous boom. I mean, a considerable growth there. But what it also did, it accelerated the, economies of scale of the cost structure of the market. And so by needing to make millions and millions of thermal devices for measuring temperature all around the world, a lot of the different cost drivers for it, in particular in the detectors, have gone down drastically. And so China, that before that never made really thermal detectors, started making thermal detectors at volume during 2020 because of COVID, and as a result drove prices of detectors down even more, which again opened up more and more markets. And so we're seeing today detectors going into more and more places simply because the cost is coming down and down. Something like automotive, using a camera for emergency braking system, is something, for example, FLIR demonstrated with Raytheon maybe as far back as even 10 years ago. But the cost was insane. It was like the cost of a car, pretty much. Now, getting to a point where these cameras, full camera system for emergency braking system might reach the hundreds of dollars or even $100 for the whole thing is, opens up an entire new market. And so, change drives opportunity. And for us, the two changes of bolometers to begin with, uncooled sensors 10 years ago, starting to hit as a technology, and acceleration of many different aspects around 2020 because of the volumes there, creates a great opportunity for us to enter into a market. A market that now is already touching into more and more places. So firefighting, for example, is something that if before COVID, some firefighters might have had what they call TIC, a thermal imaging camera, and would have for a fire engine, one camera like that the chief would hold. Today, every firefighter is getting a camera. They're installing them on like a dash cam. Automotive, as I mentioned, smart city applications, which we'll talk a little bit about. commercial uses in sporting. A gun sight for hunting, thermal gun sight, used to be $10,000, and you can get today, for $1,000, $2,000 a gun sight, and so on. All of that is great for us. It expands the TAM, it drives other prices down, and it helps us create an opportunity for us, again, to step into this world. A bit of market data. This comes from Yola Intelligence, a well-known market research. I wouldn't look at the absolute numbers because obviously those are very subjective and difficult to tell if, what exactly they are. But from a trend point of view, defense continues to be a very significant part of the market, but industrial imaging is expected to become as high as $500 million just for the microbolometers alone. Just to explain a bit on the image here, we see a pie chart for each one of those segments. The part that is grayed out in the chart is for detectors that are non-imaging, just measuring the temperature at one point alone, where the colorful part or the non-grayed part is the microbolometers, what we call our uncooled cameras. And so very growing market there, good growth, very significant in the industrial, even in the consumer part growing, and defense continues to grow, which is often driven more by the geopolitics and anything else, so harder to predict exactly. So all that creates us with an opportunity, really. The opportunity is that we have a changing market. The changing market is changing technologies, is changing cost structures, it's expanding TAM, it's a lot of great opportunities for us. And again, the idea being is we do want to grow out of the component business. We're doing that because being a pure component company, the pure play is under a lot of price pressure and is being commoditized, and we needed to find new directions for us. In addition, with the opportunity, another opportunity came up besides the technology evolving and growing, and that is more around the materials. Germanium, the key material, as everyone knows today already, comes mostly from China. Prior to the Ukraine conflict, it was China and Russia. Then Russia got shut out, so it's China. And, it's a key material for all the optics in infrared. Mid-wave, long wave, any of those, they need germanium in one way or another. We have a material that is an alternative to germanium, and we have an exclusive license that we obtained for more materials that not only provide further alternatives, but actually outperform germanium, as I'll explain a bit more. So the market is growing. When the market grows, a few things happen. Obviously, the prices go down, the TAM goes up, but the other thing is the characteristic of the player changes. And so if 10, 20 years ago, LightPath would make optics, the optics it would make would go to a customer that designed the complete system, needed LightPath or someone like LightPath to make the individual lenses, and then built and did the assemblies. In other words, our customers knew more about optics than we did. They were experts in optics. They just needed someone to make the lenses. The more the technology gets adopted into new markets, into new segments, new verticals, the less subject matter experts the customers are. Today, we're seeing customers that they know they need thermal imaging, but they definitely are nowhere near wanting to design their own system. In fact, they don't even want or care to know too much about the system, as long as they get the pixels, if you would. And just like in the world of electronics, prior to FPGAs as an equivalent, the only way to get an efficient integrated circuit would be to design your own silicon. And therefore, anyone that was doing that level of electronics was an expert in silicon. FPGA came in and democratized the silicon, if you would, to all the electronic companies. Suddenly, you could customize your own electronics without spending millions and millions of dollars at tapering out your own silicon and so on. Not that we are an FPGA, but there's an equivalent to that. There's opportunity for us here of democratizing the access to thermal imaging, to infrared imaging altogether, because it is still a very complicated technology. It is not a CCD from Sony that you buy and you plug in and you get to build a camera. These are unique devices. You need to understand a lot about their physics, how they use. You need to understand a lot about optics, optical coating, system design, thermodynamics of it, and so on. So all of that creates an opportunity here. All these new players coming in want to work with infrared imaging, want to do all of this, but don't want to invest $10 million just to set up the most basic lab for test and measurement of optical components, if you would. And so the solution is really taking our domain expertise in optics and in particular in infrared imaging that we have, leveraging additional differentiators like our materials, like our coating, continue to build more and more differentiators because that's always a protection for such a strategy, and becoming really the partner, if you would, for those companies to adopt thermal imaging and infrared imaging altogether into their systems. And so with that, let's talk a little bit about some of the changes still happening in infrared imaging, right? So the more the material gets available, the more the components, the technology is available, the more use cases open up. So for example, fugitive gas imaging, detecting gas leaks out of methane pipelines. Jason will talk a little bit about that. That's all the way from upstream, midstream, downstream, inside out. It's gas imaging not only on methane, it's also ammonia, it's also SF6 and other gases like that. Smart city applications that Todd will talk about, and automotive such as emergency braking system in the car. Some people even talking about automotive using thermal imaging to see the number of passengers or make sure no one, God forbid, left a child in the car. That might be a bit further down the road. Supply chain changes, germanium and supply from China, not only germanium. I mentioned 2020, multiple Chinese companies suddenly became experts in making detectors and making microbolometers, focal plane arrays, those detectors, heavily subsidized by the Chinese government to run those fabs and learn quickly how to make good devices like that. As a result, after 2020, after COVID, all of us have an influx of bolometers and detectors and even assemblies like the ones we make coming out of China that has learned and developed that as a result of COVID. We're seeing that today doing two things. One, to begin with, it drove new markets and new demand. Again, prices going down, more applications, more uses. But secondly, we're seeing, as a result of geopolitics, most of our customers now wanting to move away from those. So another opportunity for us. New markets opened, really that drive and cost expanded all of that, but really now opens the door to us because now everyone wants made in the US or made in Europe. So further opportunities. And then continued advancement in technology, edge processing altogether, not only AI, we do some AI, G5 does some processing at the edge of image enhancement. Multispectral imaging, for example, as a result of advancement in detectors and in materials, so on. I bring all of those up simply because change is opportunity. And for us, every change that there is an opportunity to come in and to take a bit more market share from the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is FLIR, the biggest player in thermal imaging. So for that, we need to create differentiators, and we need to continue to develop differentiators. Some came inherently. Materials, we had BD6, we went out and proactively licensed from NRL a portfolio of material. Some come from development. We acquired Visimid Technologies. Visimid developed shuttleless imaging, multi-sensor imaging. Some of it we went and just sought partners to do it with. Our AI hardware was done together with Maris Technology in Israel, simply because we saw an opportunity, again, a change, an opportunity to do something else and to create more differentiators. And some of them are just more related to process. Visimid, for example, has a very agile development process, allowing them to develop very quickly customized solutions for customers. What might take 2 years to develop a new thermal camera can be done in agile, small cycles in months now. Okay. Another differentiator that sort of came our way, but also a bit proactively, is the materials. And there are two aspects there. One is the supply chain. I don't think I need to talk too much about germanium. Everyone by now already understands and sees that. And the second is the properties of the materials. So to begin with, germanium, obviously comes from China. We make a glass that is an alternative for it. We're not the only ones. There are other companies that make chalcogenide glass. Our BD6 glass is an exact same as the material from SHOT, called IRG26, and from Umicore, and maybe another company. But we have the other materials, the 9 materials that are exclusive to us, and that only we make them, and only we have the license to make them. Now, this isn't to mean that we're going to convert all the customers to use those 9 exclusive materials. Not at all. In fact, BD6 is still going to be the workhorse and what most customers use. But having that portfolio of additional materials is kind of like the Corvette in the corner, if you would, in the showroom example. It is positioning us as a leading company in materials, positioning us as the most cutting-edge infrared materials. And even if only 10% of the customers end up using the NRL materials, which will probably be way more than 10%, but even if it's 10%, the other 90% actually are there partially because they know of the NRL materials and our positioning in the market. And so, some of this is technical, but some of it is also pure psychology and marketing to it. I mentioned the materials and advantages compared to germanium. And given we have a bit more time than the usual 15-minute presentation, I'll use that to explain a bit more about this. There are 2 things that these materials bring to the table. The first is they offer for optical engineers and designers more options. If you go to design a camera that works in the visible light today, like our cell phone camera, you have over 200 different types of glass to work with. And they're very slightly different from one another, okay? They're different in what's called refractive coefficient or Abbe number or dispersion, all of those parameters that are variable when you're designing a system. And so when you go to design a camera, if you have 200 types of glass to choose from, it doesn't, you don't need to be an optical designer to understand that you have a pretty wide selection and you can really choose the optimal ones, hence come out with cameras like in our cell phones that have 7 lenses, each of them, some of them 9, with pretty much every lens is made from a different material because the designer made them work together to come out with the most optimal design. In the infrared imaging, specifically in the mid-wave and long-wave, it is nowhere near that. There are less than 10 materials altogether to work with. And so if you're a designer and all you have is 10 tools in your tool chest, you come up with lenses like you see on the left side here, if I can point out, what's called the baseline design. This is a zoom lens that has 21 individual lenses in that, okay? There's a lot of disadvantages to having that many lenses. One is obviously the cost, right? 21 lenses need to be fabricated. Second is the weight. It weighs much more than if you could do it with much less lenses. But also the optical transmission. Every one of those surfaces, every one of those lenses loses a fraction of percent. Maybe 1% of the light doesn't go through, gets lost every time. 21 lens elements is 42 surfaces. That means if every one of those surfaces loses even 1%, and that's a great result to lose only 1%, you're talking about already nearly half the light gone by the time it reaches the detector. Instead, with the new materials, and we introduced here 9 new materials, this is a paper that was written actually by a customer, demonstrated, taking the same 3x zoom lens, redesigning it to have 12 elements. Simply because there's more tools now in that optical designer's tool chest. And so our argument and what our customers and optical designers understand oftentimes once they dig into it is you don't need to completely replace germanium. You don't need to completely replace all materials with BD6. What we're giving you is a far, far better tool set that allows you to have twice the number of materials, if you would now, and design far better systems. So that is one aspect of why that is. If you're curious on why that is important, what does the different materials do? We circled here in red a few examples. Some of them are the fact that the thermo-optic coefficient, the way the material behaves when the temperature changes, is different. Like with this one, it's negative 18. Here it is 1.2, which is nearly 0. Just to put it into perspective, a material like germanium has a thermo-optic coefficient of 700. It is highly sensitive to temperature changes. So having those variables, being able to choose materials with the thermo-optic coefficient or with the refractive index, that is the optical power of the material, to those levels, those are the kind of flexibilities and tools the optical designers need. Another really interesting one is the CTE, coefficient of thermal expansion. NRL were able to develop one material that has a coefficient of thermal expansion that is identical to that of aluminum. That means that most of the lenses are held in aluminum tubes or aluminum holders. To have a material that expands and shrinks with temperature the same way aluminum does is a great advantage for the mechanical designers. Which brings us now to the other advantage of those materials. As I mentioned before, germanium is often used, but not only germanium. Materials like silicon are used because germanium is very good for imaging in the long wave, sometimes in the mid wave a little bit, but it can't image in the short wave. Silicon can image in the short wave, can image in the mid wave, cannot image in the long wave. And so, yes, there are 10 materials roughly, but they're very limited in their range. Cameras are able to image in more than one waveband. It wasn't always the case. It's been developing in the last few years. But today you can get a detector that can image both in the shortwave and midwave. But that's useless if the material you're using for the glass, the germanium or the silicon or so on, cannot transmit all these wavelengths. NRL's prime reason for developing these materials was to develop true multispectral materials. Materials that can be used to collect light, shape it, and focus it at the detector for all infrared bands. In fact, when you look at some of the materials, some of them go down to the visible light. 0.57 micrometers or 570 nanometers is what we know as green light. 610 nanometers is red light already. So these materials not only image shortwave, longwave, and midwave, but some of them even image near infrared, the same night vision goggles, or even a little bit of visible light. What does that mean? That means that a payload like this on a drone, on a tank, on anywhere, might not need 3 separate cameras here down the road, because you're seeing here probably a shortwave camera, a midwave camera, and a visible camera, maybe even sometimes a longwave camera also. But if you can now combine those, again, the same analogy is here. The weight, the total size, needing just one detector, so power consumption goes down. All of those things are made possible with those materials. Our Mantis camera that is streaming this video feed here in the corner actually is already imaging in both midwave and longwave simultaneously, and is made possible because of those materials. You could not design the Mantis camera without the material we call BDNL4. We tried, and you just couldn't get that design done. Wrong way. Okay, and just to talk a little bit about those materials, we licensed 9 materials. We have the right for additional materials. One material is in full production already, BDNL4. 2 materials are really ready for production. We're just gradually transitioning them as we're building manufacturing capacity. The announcement from China in December threw a bit of a curveball to this plan in terms of a lot of the capacity had to go towards making BD6 glass and the existing BDNL4. So it slowed things down a bit. We're addressing that by throwing more resources into it. So BDNL8 and BDNL6 will be available soon. In fact, BDNL8 is already used in 2 DoD programs where we gave them a sort of initial taste of that and to develop around it. But we haven't, again, publicly announced it just because we don't want to disappoint customers with limited capacity on that. We're now ordering more equipment. We're adding more people. We're increasing the capacity, so that should get solved. BDNL 7 and 9 are, there's a typo there, are in qualifications process. That is a qualification process we're doing in conjunction with Department of Defense Logistics Agency, where they are actually bankrolling the process to qualify those materials out of the need that the market has for them. Those 2 materials, BDNL 7 and 9, were chosen a bit earlier than the others because the Army had a specific program that needed one of those materials. So we put them ahead of the others, but we're very shortly going to get to the rest and then consider whether to license more materials from NRL or not on that. Another type of differentiator that I mentioned, so materials was one. The ability to customize the camera quickly is another one. With the acquisition of Visimid, we added in the capability not only to customize design and customize optical assemblies, but also the video engine or the whole camera core, if you would, behind that. And so together with Visimid, we're now able to make complete thermal uncooled cameras beginning to end, where we can customize all aspects of this. This means that a process of development of a camera for a customer means this agile process of multiple iterations where together between the Visimid and Orlando teams, we're able to optimize the form factor, the choice of process, the software, the optics, the system integration, and a complete customization. One example of that is obviously our Lockheed Martin project that Visimid is doing, and we'll talk about, as well as other programs that we have where we're developing custom cameras. Okay, that's, I think, it on sort of strategy level and differentiators behind that. Any questions on that part first, or do we do all the questions at the end? At the end, okay. Okay. Jason? Yep.
Thank you, Sam. So, Jason Messerschmidt, VP Global Sales and Marketing. So, kind of looking at the engineering of a new LightPath, as Sam was talking about a strategy, which actually is, kind of evolving the company up, what I would refer to as up the food chain, right? So when Sam and LightPath as a whole, came about, we were talking and selling lenses for $1. $2, very commercialized market that has increased in price pressure and just, all kinds of global competition, right? So as we look at the progress, as we go into a LightPath 3.0 state, you're talking differences in ASPs, which is kind of a leading indicator of, the complexity of the product, the value you're supplying to a customer, how much of that overall product, program, and solution are you actually owning in conjunction with that particular customer? So you're going from just doing lenses, ASPs and the dollars up to maybe $50 or $60. And then you're kind of moving into the second step, the LightPath 2.0 part of it is creating an assembly, right? So maybe multiple lenses, creating a semi-finished product to supply to a customer for them to put into their own particular system. As you get beyond that, that increases the, ASPs, pretty significantly when you're talking compared to a dollar, right? So that's a nice jump. And then you move into where you're doing more of what I would refer to as like a subsystem, where you're capable of supplying the, overall electronics package, customized to their specific needs, the optical assembly, giving them the right communication ports, the customization from Visimid, all the core optics from the legacy LightPath, and giving them a full-blown imaging system that, now when we're talking like our furnace cameras, you're talking ASPs up to $30,000, so I have to sell a lot less $30,000 cameras to get to a mark that I want to get to than compared to trying to sell dollar lenses that are just getting competed with everywhere. So those differentiating factors. And then at the very end, we'll talk about this a little more, much more in depth later. Now you're talking about the addition of G5 infrared. That brings a whole nother layer of capabilities, because these two capabilities here are very married together in a lot of the applications we'll talk about, where there is definitive need for both cooled and uncooled products. Maybe it's a cooled camera for something specific, and there's 4 or 5 uncooled cameras within that same application. So us being able to serve that entire market now with the acquisition of G5 Infrared is an extremely exciting time for all of us. Al?
Hello, I'm Al. I wanted to talk a quick minute about the path, LightPath 1.0 to 3.0. It's not just about product development, although we focused on the technology and the product development. The entire organization had to be transformed and is still in the process of transforming to just support that vision, that product, the sales force, and everything else. This is just a few things. It does definitely start with the strategy, but over the last 4 years, we had to right-size the company. So we had 6 locations that are now rationalized down to 3, although we just added 1 and 2. So now we're back to 5, I guess, as of Tuesday. But it is a good reason. We de-emphasized our investments in China 4 years ago, right? So that was part of our strategy from the beginning. Geopolitics then took hold. We had issues in China that were related to all the usual China problems, bad management team, fraud, and everything else that had to be done. So the global footprint, the rationalization, and then reorganizing everything for the strategy around that strategy. So, you have to have a strategy, you have to have an idea where you're going, and then actually everything else has to go with it. We even had to downsize the board of directors and even make some changes there, which is not always an easy thing to do. But your board has to be supportive, just like we support them and the investment community, right? We sunsetted unrelated products. We just sunsetted, I think, the last of them last week, 2 weeks ago. We eliminated fraud in China. We've insourced some things and outsourced other things. That should be both ways. And from the tour today, you saw some other opportunities that Sam discussed about what we're going to outsource going forward. Obviously, the acquisition of Visimid and now the acquisition for G5, all on that path to 3.0. As technology-driven as LightPath was in the 1.0 version, we got to accelerate our ability to get to 3.0. Manufacturing back in the U.S., anybody who's watching, I encourage you to come visit us. You'll understand what manufacturing in the United States looks like. Of course, the NRL technology licenses, the patents that were around that, and the expansion that to the EU is a big part of the overall plan. And that started before there was a product, before we tested anything, or before DLA gave us a dime, right? So you have to follow the strategy there. And of course, now it enables us to do some more of the EU defense work. I did touch on the facilities. Over the last 5 years or so, we've invested somewhere north of about 8 or 9 million, most of it in the United States and in Latvia. The Latvian market, or the European market, is very favorable, and Latvia is a great footprint to be there with. And of course, the expansion here in reinvesting in the United States. Very popular today, but we started that journey about 3 years ago. The China facility is half. Actually, we had three different sites in China. We're down to one. It is the smallest manufacturing location of all the locations. So that ought to give you an idea of where we are with that. Yeah. Texas is the smallest in the moment where Jason is, but they're very specific, very focused on rapid R&D, rapid prototyping, which then can be launched either to Orlando, Latvia, or in the future G5 for manufacturing. Of course, there's the facility here, which is now finished, and no need to expand it any further. We have plenty of capacity and plenty of room.
Thank you, Al. So we'll expand a little bit more on, where we're focusing, what we believe are our pillars of growth as we change the company, going from that component manufacturing to the assemblies, to uncooled cameras, to cooled camera applications. We want to target certain areas where we know we have differentiating factors. We can go in and we can actually, take a problem that a customer has and provide them a solution for it that they're going to find value in. Not just making things to make things, making things for an actual purpose based on the industry and based on, where we feel we can be extremely successful. So optical and camera assemblies is, kind of the groundwork that got us to LightPath 3.0, right? Taking multiple lenses, putting it in an assembly, selling it to customers, moving our way up that particular food chain from a $50 lens to a $500 assembly to, multiple $1,000 assemblies, depending on the complexity of that particular product. So we are totally customizable. What you see in the picture is also our, what I would refer to as an assembly that includes a electronics package, a lens, specifically in this case designed to be able to visualize gas. So this would go out to a integrator, somebody that's going to put it in their own system in probably an ATEX type enclosure, and take it out to an oil and gas site and put it into a video management system to detect methane leaks. So, and that's a uncooled camera with Visimid-based electronics and a specially coated lens from LightPath. So, I mean, you're getting all the different worlds within that particular product to solve a problem and be able to go out and capture that market share. Government and defense and aerospace, a lot of this revolves around the cutting edge materials, the alternatives to germanium, the materials Sam talked about when you're getting into some of this really complex stuff where you can take a 21 element assembly and turn it into a 12 element assembly, putting tools in their toolbox to be able to do more than you can in any of the other commercial or industrial spaces. And we're looking for and continue to look at, what I would refer to as new commercial applications, oil and gas plant emissions monitoring. Typically that has been served by cooled cameras, so cost prohibitive for mass deployment. All these old oil pads that need to be monitored and other areas, you could do that with an uncooled sensor from us with the right electronics and the right lenses coated the proper way to be able to visualize it. You could put 4 on a site for half the cost of one cooled camera. But then you also go back to the conversation from a couple minutes ago, coupling a cooled camera due to the sensitivity, due to the length of being able to visualize, and add that to a uncooled camera, and we can provide a overall solution. Smart city applications, which I'll have Todd talk about in a little bit, security applications, the G5 infrared camera, being able to turn around and, visualize things from a very long distance. The uncooled product lineup, our Mantis, which is, streaming in the back, and when you rewatch the web version, our high sensitivity camera, less than 15 millikelvin sensitivity, allows us to visualize gas better than any other uncooled camera on the market. Furnace cameras, being able to inspect inside large industrial type furnaces at extremely high temperatures, 1,500, 2,000 degrees Celsius. Edge IR, which is our, relationship with Maris Technologies, being able to integrate on the edge AI algorithms, and our compact suite thermal imaging cameras, our Solo, which is over on the table that you can also see. Mr. Liebert, going to talk to the group about our Lockheed program that Mr. Liebert and his team in Plano is really heading up.
Thanks. I'm Jason Liebert, GM for Visimid. We happily have joined LightPath in July of 23, so we're glad to be part of the team and contribute here. I think the big part about this, to really talk about it, we're excited about this program. It has huge upside for production, and right now we're currently building units that are in DVT. They're going into flight test. They're going into qualifications. We just had a design review with them yesterday that went really well with our Lockheed customer. So really excited about that program. But I think what's interesting to talk about is kind of back to Sam's point earlier about our customization or being a partner to our customers, and that's really how we got to this point. The whole thing started in 2017, 2018, when Lockheed was looking for a solution, and they went to the usual suspects to try and get somebody to build something for them, and they just couldn't get the partnership. They couldn't get the response back from those guys to help them get there. So, they ended up coming to us and came to us with a challenge of, hey, do you think you could make a sensor that could do these types of things in a package small enough to fit into something the size of a roll of nickels? And we started off with the PowerPoint, and I was like, well, I don't know if we can do it or not. But working with them over several years, we actually developed, built, prototyped, and delivered to them, a solution that they were actually very excited about, that they started testing. And in the delivery of those prototypes, another division of Lockheed that was pursuing this particular contract saw that, said, hey, this looks like a really good application, something that would work for this other application, and then actually took that and used it to integrate, which is really kind of Lockheed's kind of setting up their differentiator for their solution on how we think we're going to beat Raytheon in this endeavor. And it all centers around, something that started several years ago. And then, we still have the original prototypes that we built that hopefully will be, something that we get into production later. So.
Thank you, sir. We have other existing programs of record. We have multiple areas of programs of record that were, some of which may even been in production while you were out touring the production floor. Different programs that have been in place for, quite a while, and also different programs that have come about in the recent past with changes in some of those particular applications, especially the in-space communication is I believe one of the coolest ones, and where a lot of our products are being utilized. So some key applications in industries, we talked a little bit about the optical gas imaging camera. You got a federal mandate through the EPA to, regulate the amount of methane that is leaked into the environment. So, plus a lot of these, what I would, refer to as super majors are just, good corporate citizens. And plus it's money that's flying out. They want to save that, right? So they can very easily literally visualize the, return on investment when they're deploying cameras that can help them keep their leaks under control. Not just from a corporate citizen standpoint or an EPA standpoint, but money back into their pockets that they can utilize to reinvest in other things. Again, typically this has been done with, cooled cameras, and it's, kind of limited the amount of resources they're capable of putting at it. But with an uncooled camera that can visualize methane and other VOCs very easily, this is going to be really good for us. And it's definitely an industry and a vertical that we're paying a lot of attention to and moving forward with. So also in the utility market, they have a gas called SF6, and it, when one of these goes bad, it'll leak out, and it's extremely bad for the environment. Not as much regulation surrounding it, but it's really bad for the environment, and these companies know it, so they spend a lot of money trying to minimize the effort that it puts into the environment. So they're, right now they're doing it all by handheld devices. They got to send the guy out in a truck, and as we get into this fixed autonomous type monitoring of multiple different kinds of applications, this is where these particular devices become critical. Our furnace applications, you'll see in the back corner there's a furnace scope that goes into a big, large industrial furnace, 1800 degree, 2000 degree Celsius type environment, be able to visualize the inside of the furnace to be able to see slag buildup. They don't want to shut these things down. These things are 10 stories tall, huge, huge environments. They don't want to shut them down if they don't have to, because it's a loss of money, right, when they do that. But they also don't want something bad to happen to them, so they have to monitor them internally. And our technology with the, uncooled mid-wave camera, it, provides them the ability to put it in multiple different places and be able to see everything they need to see, to be able to know that they either need to turn it down for service or, further inspect something down the road. Mr. Todd Croteau is going to come up and talk a little bit about our automotive and smart cities.
Good afternoon, Todd Croteau, Business Development for LightPath. So 2 opportunities that LightPath has looked into over the last year since I've joined. One is automotive, the other is smart city. If you're familiar with smart city, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So automotive, NHTSA released the FMVSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number 127, March, April of last year. What is that? It is given the directive to OEMs that they have to stop going forward 65 miles an hour in a certain distance, as well as a certain distance at a certain miles per hour, I believe it's 45, in reverse. So how do they do that? They look at the sensor suite that the manufacturers are using now and say you have to do that. I've spoken to lobbyists, I've spoken to the OEMs, I've spoken to LiDAR manufacturers who have LiDAR on the cars now. They seem to think that they can do it with software and the sensors that they have now. Others seem to think that we could use an infrared sensor to help with that. There's a positive and negative. OEMs say, please don't make me put another sensor on the car. It's just going to add another cost. Others say, it's a good idea, it's just untested. So we're talking to everybody in that vertical to see if there is a play. We have a camera with a specific lens that can meet the needs for that. It is just unfounded and untested yet. So we are going up into that direction. Smart city is another vertical that's very promising. There are a lot of smart city companies that are working with municipalities, states, and countries in regards to gathering technology to help make, I will say, their city smarter and more efficient. We are under contract with a specific smart city manufacturer where we are manufacturing our CST Solo infrared camera to go in a box with 2 other sensors. They have a deployment that's scheduled in Q3 of this year. And what they do is they take that data stream that comes out of the whole box, either sell it back to the municipality or city, or they parse it out depending on what they're looking for. So this will be a first for this company and first for the city that it's being deployed. It's really amazing. So we have our first delivery, I believe, at the end of this week, and then follow-on contract after. So if we take a look at the 2 opportunities, automotive is, I'm going to use the term scary one because it's automotive. Smart city is the exciting one, as far as I'm concerned. So we are seeing some promise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. When you're on your way to the cool event that we're going to do tonight, take a look at every intersection that you go to and look up on the poles. You'll see cameras, multiple cameras, sometimes multiple sensors, even some radar. And then look at the corner of the intersection. There's always going to be a silver box there. You would be utterly shocked at the amount of technology that goes into every intersection that you drive through. It's quite shocking, to be perfectly honest. So going to turn it back over to Sam, talk about our exciting G5 acquisition.
Thank you. Okay, great. So yeah, definitely a very, very important incremental step for us and a group we're excited to have with us and be working together. So lots of great things here. I mean, the fit into what we call our LightPath 3.0 should be obvious by now. in terms of technology, in terms of product. Those here physically can see a demonstration of it. We have a camera set up outside and streaming on the large monitor here, and we can see it. Tomorrow, I think we're going to even try and catch some video of a SpaceX launch happening from here with these long-range cameras. G5 located in Hudson, New Hampshire. The location is actually pretty important since the Keene, New Hampshire area, for reasons I'm not sure why, is a center of infrared optics per se. And so it's amazing how much of the infrared optics that we make here actually ends up shipping to that area, to different customers. So besides, G5 being a great company and an incredible team with strong products on an amazing growth trajectory, it also gives us a physical presence in an area that's pretty important in this part of our industry. So we've talked a number of times by now, and you're all fed up of hearing on our growth and transition. But if we just look at ASPs as a indicator for the complexity of the product we do, to the value we create, to therefore the value we can capture, ASP is a very good indicator, lead indicator to that. And going from those notorious lenses that have been dropping in price to the assemblies, to uncooled cameras, to now adding cooled cameras, is a very natural progression in the complexity of the product, the value we're creating, and soon to be shown in the financial results, the value we're capturing also long term. The transaction is a upfront payment of $27 million, a 25% of it taken in equity by the owner of G5, so staying on board, and part of a sort of vote of confidence in what we're going and what we're doing in the direction we're going. Earnouts structured over 12 and 24 months, simply because G5 is on a great growth trajectory. We think, and the G5 team thinks, there's a lot more growth for them to deliver on, and we want them to enjoy some of that. And so if and when they will deliver on those growth rates, and we're talking here of growth rates of 40, 50% a year, there'll be an addition earnout there, which 1/3 of the earnout is paid in stock as well. We closed the transaction already, so don't need to talk about all of that part. It's a great strategic fit for us. We immediately get a nearly 60% jump in our top line, highly profitable, highly complementary product. We share a lot of the same customers. It's actually most of the customers either side emailed to tell them about the acquisition already worked with the other one in any case. So some great synergies there. Many of the customers of G5 that buy their cooled cameras and integrate them into large pan tilts, you will see those customers also have smaller pan tilt systems that have uncooled cameras in them. And so, a really great synergy there of that culture, as those here present can tell from all the jokes flying around. We already know each other pretty well, and the two companies fit very well together. And the company is at a growth trajectory. I mean, we'll share in a minute a contract that we literally just won and are about to announce publicly that is one of those. So very exciting times. The combination of the two really positions us in a very unique place in the industry. In fact, other than FLIR, there's almost no companies out there today that have a combination of offering complete, ready-to-use final product of cooled and uncooled cameras. There are sensor companies like Linrad in France that would make both. There are some companies that make modules for cooled and uncooled, but there are very, very few that have that range. And as you can imagine, the market we're going after is such that we're building this vertically integrated company to become an industry leader in infrared imaging altogether, period. There's a lot of markets there to take, and we're very well positioned now, both in products, in key technologies like our AI, like G5's ATCOM image processing, and programs of record like our NGSRI, shooting gear replacement, like the Apache program, and like 2 big program of records that G5 already has. And so we're positioning ourselves to become at least $55 million in revenue in the next 12 months in terms of top-line revenue, and growing margins, growing EBITDA numbers, as Al will talk about. A range of products, all the way from what they call short range, which for uncooled cameras is still long range. But when you talk about ranges, you talk in optics world or about DRI, which is the ability to detect a person, meaning you see a little bit of a signal there is someone there, recognize a person, oh, that looks like a person, to identify, oh, I can actually see the exact person. And the ranges get calculated as a function of the optics, the resolution, and so on. And you're talking about this industry leader, and this is by far the leader here, can detect a person by as far as 37 kilometers away. That's just crazy numbers. And to show what that actually means in real life, this is an airport 7.5 miles away, taken with this camera. It's 785. In theory, the 785 should be able to identify, again, identification is this image on the right, identify a person from 8 kilometers away, roughly. And here you see a person in this image. We cut it out here at 7.5 miles, clearly identified. So these cameras really do deliver up to the cutting edge, the theoretical limits of detecting and identifying people or vehicles or ships or drones or you name it. Everyone has a calculation to it from extreme ranges. As a result, G5 has installations that are in Border Patrol, now in Navy, in counter-UAS, in key facility protections, prison systems, power plants, and more and more. And that list is just growing and growing. Another technology G5 has, similar to our AI technology embedded in the camera, G5 embeds what calls an ATCOM, image enhancement technology. You can see it here in this image where the ATCOM is applied to the square in the middle, and you can see just how sharp this image at 6 miles away is compared to the edges of the image. If you look at the vehicle on the top right corner here, blurred versus the vehicles here inside with the stabilization, motion compensation, and lace. And some of it is also turbulence mitigation. When you're imaging something that's that far out, even small wind gusts and change in temperature in the air causes turbulence and impacts the image. Currently, G5 focuses on 3 main areas, or has been until now, and that is the long-range detection, as in Border Patrol, naval, as the programs that we just got awarded, and surveillance in general. But together with our sales team and Jason here that came from FLIR and has been bringing his collaborators from FLIR slowly over, we believe there's much more for us to grow into. And counter-UAS is a big one, critical infrastructure, gas sensing. LightPath already has 1 camera there. There's a G5 camera being developed that will be complementary to it. Multispectral imaging that could be done with our unique materials, integrating our AI, and so on and so on. Lots and lots of synergies there. So strong synergies on the sales and marketing, strong synergies on growth, operational also, insourcing the components. The G5 currently outsources, making them at LightPath, using our materials instead of germanium, some redundancy in operational support and such, but not huge. G5 is a very lean organization. And then lots of technology synergies in the different differentiators that both companies have developed over the years, and that now will work together on both platforms of cooled and uncooled. As an example, this is a cross-section of a G5 camera. All these lenses in here, all these parts will be able to be sourced now internally within LightPath down the road. We're not pushing on doing that on day one, because again, the main driver for the acquisition is the growth of both companies, is the portfolio, is the materials, but there are also cost saving synergies down the road. Lots of great customers for G5. I mean, pretty much who's who in anyone that uses these type of cameras. And 2 programs, maybe, Mike, if we can put you on the spot to quickly talk about them. Yeah, you should hold this thing if you're going to talk. Nothing like an introduction to.
Yes, Mike Emarelli from G5. So the slide up on the screen and you're viewing right now is, which one is the CTSE? Okay, so this is a DHS Border Patrol program. It's gone through several name changes and iterations over the years, but it has whittled down to 3 primes that are legally have received IDIQ contracts to deliver hardware for the border on this program. And we are partnered with Elbit North America, who is the incumbent in the for fielded systems prior to the CTSE program. That was called IFT. They delivered back in 2012, they were awarded a contract for 50 tower systems that were the most technologically advanced border security systems ever deployed by DHS. And the CTSE program is basically a follow-on to that. They've combined technologies from several different programs into the CTSE program. And one of the biggest differentiators for this program is intended to be autonomous. They're trying to take the man out of the loop. So IOIs, objects of, they try to identify people targets, vehicle targets, all with software, and then decisions made whether to engage, DHS folks as well at that point. So right now we are finishing delivering our first LRIP units into the field for deployment, and they are planning, DHS is trying to catch up on a delivery schedule that they're a little bit behind on, and we hope to see more awards later in Q3. That pretty much sums it up there. Okay, so yes. So this next slide here is a Navy program called SPEAR, Shipboard Panoramic Electro-Optic Infrared System. It is an L3 product that is going to be eventually deployed on all of the large vessels in the Navy. We were originally awarded a $1 million design contract to take one of our standard products, optimize it for the application, and we just received the first order for 7 units to be used for qualification and testing and initial deployments. And this is a program of record. It has a lot of legs going out into the future, and this is definitely one of those products that is on the high end of the ASP scale that you've seen. So it's great to be on a product like this that's going to have a long life. And considering I didn't have any planning, that's it.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, the SPEAR program is a flagship program for the Navy in terms of protection of vessels against UAVs, against small vessels, small marine vessels, against cruise missiles also. So it's a pretty big deal. And in fact, there's talk already on the next generation of SPEAR by the Navy, which is already designing using our NRL materials. So even before the acquisition, we were already sort of in the same boat, no pun intended. But now this really puts us, combines our key technologies together in a way I know the Navy is extremely excited about. It's not the only thing, and G5 has other program of records which are continuous. For example, the urban warfare training centers, Ice Stalker system on aircraft carriers with FAA, ongoing repairs and replacements of cameras on LVSS towers, and multiple prison security systems around the world. And those are just a taste of it, but each one of those are ongoing programs, and each one of them is, alone in the $1 million to $2 million a year for G5. Okay, now the numbers. There you go.
Like Jim Kane.
Yep.
Wrong way. All right, so I guess first comments about a large bulk of the financing was done through conventional preferred. Northrun is the lead investor on that. They really are a fundamental long-term investor, right? Sam and I were very skittish about this entire preferred convertible approach, but I think we found the right partner. Northrun will have a board seat. Well, they'll be on the board for up to 5 years. They really are a participant. This is a seasoned group who have sort of decided to use their own money, create their own investment firm, and do it sort of the way they've always wanted to do without being beholden to individual investors so that they can take a long-term view. We're only the third public company that they've done this with. Right, so they have been very selective over the last 3 years, literally one a year, very pointed, very selective. So we did get initial feedback about whether or not it's toxic. It's not. It's as not can be in today's environment. And for those of you who've been around a few years, it's how they used to be before they became toxic. So we took a while, on sort of negotiating the terms to get it where it is. So just the features of it. I'm not going to read it to you. The next one's an eye chart, so I will read it. So around the deal structure, it's 25. The convertible preferred is $25.5 million. The unit conversion price is $220, right? So the per share is $215 plus the 0.05 on the warrant. There's 37.5% warrant coverage struck at $258, right? 6.5% interest. We have a PIK option on the interest. We could pay it in cash or obviously shares. There's a mandatory conversion provision after 3 years, and then redemption provision after 5 years. All right.
Those were two things we were very strong on.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to get it out.
The promissory note is $5.3 million. If you recall, we had a note for $3 million, so we took that note out, and that note had been rolled into this whole entire transaction. That's why we're saying $4 million of it is new money. $1.3 million is a rollover from the old $3 million note. It's 10% interest as long as we maintain our covenants. If we break the covenants, it goes up to 12%, and it's pretty standard bank covenant type stuff. Nothing unusual in there. It's a 2-year term, so it's not intended to be permanent, but it is intended to bridges. And then we did a small piece of equity, $1.5 million. $500,000 is new money at $215, no warrants. $1 million rolled in from the existing note, so it's the promissory note that we had $3 million in place with the same terms as the convertible preferred. Like I said, Northrun Capital plus 2 already existing investors are the contributors to the entire thing. In total, we brought in $29 million in cash. Walk away after a transaction is 6.7. So we don't have to invest CapEx. If you're on a tour today, you heard me say that 50 times. But some of these programs, particularly Spears and some others, are going to start kicking off. We do need working capital for those, right? The lead times between ordering materials and actually delivering can be quite lengthy. There is a mandatory conversion price, is a little repetitive here. Optional redemption period from LightPath or Northrun after 5 years. Northrun's on the board, and while Northrun's on the board, they've also agreed to a no short provision, which makes sense. Right? In terms of shares, that's the actual share count, how all of this converts. So it's 600,000 in equity, 1.9 million, almost 2 million to the sellers, $11 million in preferred, and it's hard to read that, $4.5 million in preferred warrants. Talking a little bit, this is not guidance. Not guidance, all right? Talk a little bit about what our expectations are. So we have pretty robust models that we built, sort of worst case, best case, better case, fantastic case, right? And we modeled it out here. But the base case is built. The base case is sort of this little blue bar here. That's built on what we think the two companies would do in normal organic year-over-year growth, being a little aggressive in the market, bringing some new products to market, but nothing over the top, right? So we call that the base case. And it has high probability opportunities that are not 10 and 15 million per year, not those kinds of things, right? That's what the business case is built on. That's what the price around a G5 was built on as well. The next little category is high probability opportunities. This is something like the base case plus Apache. We know we're on Apache. We know it's going to happen. You know, high probability it'll happen. So we build it into that. That top band is when we start seeing things where the Lockheed Martin program win, and you've got a $10 million a year event. The Spears program win, and you've got a $10 million a year event. It's not 2, it's 10, right? Those kind of things. So it's entirely possible that we could hit those large opportunities in the long run, but we build everything around basically this line. This line, we're right there, all the economic models to warrant it. The earnout for the sellers is based on, of course, doing much better than that, right? All right, last numbers on G5 itself. At the end of 2024, still unaudited, we'll have it any day now. They did 15.1 million in sales. They had 5.7 million in gross profit, 37.8% gross margin. 5.6 million in expenses, G&A expenses, and an adjusted EBITDA number of 1.2 million or 7.9%. We are targeting sort of a 20% growth for them. However, the earnout is at 21. Starts at 21. And Mike is one of the G5 folks. They have high level of confidence they'll do that 21, which is obviously a lot more than 20% year-over-year growth for them. The cost of goods have no synergies in the assumptions. Sam just did the 3D cross section of what the camera looked like. We do think we can reduce cost of raw materials, cost of components, and even maybe simplify some of the optical designs. But it's not at the top of the list of things to do. That's a 1-2 year kind of plan. But there are opportunities there. The gross margin expectation is 35 to 45%. And this is pretty important. They're going to have to be somewhere in the center of that range to make the EBITDA target of 20%. So your earnout is gated on 20% EBITDA. It doesn't matter what the revenue number is, right? But the first stage is 21. So at 21 million and 20% EBITDA, they earn. At 21 million and 18% EBITDA, no earnout. So in order to get there, they're going to have to do 40% margins, at least. G&A expenses, there's an opportunity for some cost reduction there. But as Sam said, they run so lean, I don't imagine that it's going to be significant amounts of money. And it's certainly not our focus at all. And that is, in fact, we're hoping Mike and the team grow real big, and the cost of sales and the G&A expenses are a lot higher next year, but to the positive, not to the negative, right? So this is really not a cost down play. It's one of those unique situations where it's really not. And at the same time, it doesn't require heavy lifting and heavy investment other than working cap for us. And their footprint is good, their CapEx is set, and they're good. The EBITDA target is 17 to 22%. for the next fiscal year. Obviously, we've talked about the earnout being at 20. It's entirely possible that they could earn, their earnout and then some. It's not, they pick the numbers, so their confidence level is high. It's a good acquisition. It's accretive in every element, and we financed it as carefully as you can in the scenario that we're in.
Thanks, Al. Okay, very quickly before we break to Q&A, we often get asked how to measure success in 2025. I translate that into what to look out for. What should one pay attention to in order to see if we're on plan or not on plan, how we're doing versus it. So, of course, we're expecting an accelerated revenue growth. Cross-selling of G5 products, putting Jason and his team on the spot, but, there's a lot of expectations there that the two teams can help each other quite a bit in cross-selling. ASPs will naturally grow as we go down that path, and anyone that monitors those in our queues will be able to see it. We cannot guarantee if Lockheed will win or not win, but we will have progress with Lockheed. Now, just as a reminder, in addition to the large NGSRI program with Lockheed, we already know that they're integrating our camera solution into at least 2 more platforms. So we will have some announcements around some level of progress. It could be, test results. It could be new programs. It could be, shipments of flight units and so on. But we'll try and, within reason, without tipping the hand for the competition, provide updates about how we're doing with that program. Of course, it's a competitive bid, so we have to be very cautious there. We absolutely expect more defense contract wins and specifically also more wins around Black Diamond. We'll be trying to share them, even if they're not significant to the level of material, even if it's only a $500,000 contract and so on. But if it's a design win where we switch a customer over from germanium to Black Diamond, we will try and share those as much as we can. Our EBITDA turning positive already. We expect it within 2025 to grow to a point of 10+%, and we know our ultimate goal there also. And then keep an eye out on new camera products, both uncooled cameras and cooled cameras. We'll be sharing them as announcements. Again, keep in mind, many of the press releases we issue are designed towards our customers first. So they might not have the information financial investors want in them because sometimes they're just to drive sales. So, but reach out and we're happy to discuss with investors as possible whatever we can. Okay, and I think with that we can do Q&A. Yep. Okay.
I'll just say if I could, I'm JC with you, Atlanta Business Journal. First off, thanks for having me here. It's very informative and solid reading up on, a lot that really stood out. As you look ahead to the year ahead, is there any, with the acquisition happening with G5, does it have anything to do with growth in the workforce? Is there going to be more, hands on deck? What do those numbers look like, and how soon do you feel that those might be rolled out in terms of new jobs and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And the question was, for those online, I'll repeat it, was with the growth we're seeing, what are our expectations on growth in the workforce, hands on deck, recruiting, and so on? And I'd say the answer is, in general, absolutely yes. I'd say in all of the 3 locations. I'm actually pretty excited to be able to talk about our U.S. side now as being the largest part of the business after the G5 acquisition, very, very different than what the company was only a few years ago. But all 3 locations have open positions of recruiting, have need for technical people. Orlando specifically, where the heavier manufacturing part is done, we have multiple positions for assemblers, technicians, operators, process engineers, you name it. We have some great partnerships. Valencia College here in Orlando, we're tied in with them. They have an incredible program they put together, 2-3 years ago? Not even, right? Yep. For workforce development, sponsored by Americom, with money coming out of DOD IBAS for workforce development. And we're seeing the results. We're already hiring out of there. we're right next door to UCF, so we tap that as much as we can, and always have a few interns floating around from UCF and positions for that. So absolutely expect a growth. It's a bit better now to recruit than it was a couple of years ago. 2 years ago was pretty much a nightmare. But sort of, I'm happy that the unemployment rate is low, but I'd rather see more candidates and more employees if possible. Please, yeah.
Sam, given the complementary nature of the product sets, are you already out there doing marketing together, or is that a process that takes 3 months, 6 months to kind of put together?
Okay, so the question for those online was, given the complementary product sets, are we out there marketing together? The answer is yes, we're already there. In fact, the day after we announced acquisition, before we even closed, we already had our oil and gas camera sales guy on the phone with G5, learning about the gas cameras that they're developing and helping to accelerate some of the testing there and some of the qualification of it, because we're going through that with our uncooled gas camera. I can tell you, these guys are stomping at the bit to go out and start selling these products. Jason came to the due diligence of G5, I think, on your second week at LightPath, and you could see the spark in his eye, like to be able to sell those kind of products. He couldn't wait for it. So the team is out there already. We're creating marketing material. We're doing websites, but we're already combining forces in trade shows, in customers, our offices aboard, and so on. Yeah, a very detailed. Yeah.
So 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 12 months, and even 24 months. Sales and marketing coming together is the 30 to 90 day type stuff. Day one activity tends to equal like HR, right?
Yeah.
So we do have detailed plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the G5 programs and records, looks like it might be up for like 6 of them. Is there any document that lays out the kind of timeline of when those are going to be awarded and who they're competing against?
Yeah, so all of those already awarded, the ones that we talked about. The Border Patrol was awarded last month in January, right? And the first camera shipped out?
Actually, it was December.
December, okay, yeah. And the Naval Spear program is today, actually. That's fresh news. We need to issue a press release on that. And that came already with a purchase order of, what, $2 million? 2 million roughly, or just over $2 million?
Yeah,
$2.8 million roughly. We'll have that in the press release. The other programs, things like RVSS, Ice Stalker, those are ongoing. They've been in there for 2-3 years at least, in some of them, right? Yeah. 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 Oh, okay. I thought that was already. So maybe one more needs to be awarded still. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Jim, thanks. Sure. The only thing we've seen until now, the question was, given the turmoil in Washington, budget cuts and so on, are we seeing any impact? So far, the only impact we saw was, as of yesterday, Commerce Department put a pause on any export licenses and said no export licenses are being issued right now. I'm assuming that's more of an alignment thing rather than a policy. We'd be shooting ourselves in the foot if we no longer export anything. Other than that, we have not seen anything. We actually welcome some of those things. In many cases, we find that we move much faster than the DoD administration or acquisition processes can move, and it frustrates us a lot of times. So, new players like Anduril and companies like that, we love working with them. They move at our pace, and we can finally do things quickly and not measure things in months and not years. But other than that, we haven't seen any direct impact to us yet.
G5 goes fast. So anything that needs to go
be so.
We're
Yeah.
in a good spot.
Yeah.
We're usually waiting on building on that a little bit. The new administration is looking over towards potentially Russia, peace deal with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Spent all this time on finding Canadian.
Yeah.
Denmark had opened back up, and people said, "Oh, this is the new regime." And we're
Yeah. Okay. So the question for those online was, given the new administration is, warming up towards Russia, ending the conflict in Ukraine, would that affect the germanium situation and all our investment? I think the germanium was a wake-up call to everyone. I mean, even if tomorrow morning germanium is available, some people will breathe a sigh of relief, will take it, but, the damage is there, sort of, in terms of, people understanding the vulnerability and the risks related to that. Now, the U.S. and others are working on developing germanium supply chains, and we welcome that because our materials are not a 100% alternative. You need, again, back to the example of the optical designer that has in his toolkit 20 glasses now instead of 10. Those are needed. I mean, and those are the thing. What we want is to reduce the dependency and not be at the point where it can be shut down completely. So I'm not worried about that. I think maybe there will be some that will go back to it, but for most people, it was a big wake-up call. We did a lot of germanium optics before. As much as 30% of our infrared optics was germanium optics, and it was, not the most profitable business, but it's good business because we know how to handle germanium. We cut that down drastically to 10%, but we have the capacity. So if germanium is available, we ourselves might take some germanium work on again. But ultimately, our goal is to, leverage this to get our customers to understand the advantages of switching over. Yeah.
So anything it actually hurts China. Think about the macroeconomics behind it. It's just a little bit of the spigot gets turned on, and we become less dependent on China. Doesn't really, but it'd still be high price, and it'd still be not flowing like it used to. So as Sam said, you still have to have a mix. They're not producing enough in Russia. It's just a little bit better, but not.
Yeah. Please.
Question probably for both Sam and Jason. This probably goes across LightPath and G5 independently as well as you come together. But you talked about FLIR being kind of the big dog in this infrared market.
Yeah.
Really an opportunity to be kind of the second leader here. I'd love to get a perspective, maybe more so from Jason, given his long history
Yeah.
here. What are the strategies to make LightPath kind of the premier and only alternative to FLIR?
Yeah.
Are there any structural obstacles to, any sort of rapid, emergence into that market to be the alternative to FLIR in any way? And what degree does this apply across LightPath?
So I think some of it, I'll repeat the question just so the people online, is there strategic road mapping? Is there hindrances to us going out and garnishing a certain portion of the available market from some of the larger industry leaders? And how do we, kind of portray that? First of all, I think it's don't bite off more than we can chew, right? Pick 3 or 4 verticals that are meaningful to us where we have differentiated product. A lot of the larger manufacturers want to just manage in volume. They want to pump out 1,000 of something. They don't necessarily care about the guy that needs a couple hundred because that guy needs it tweaked or with a certain coded lens or a certain type of communication port that we could do through our Visimid. We're not trying to solve every problem, right? Because that would be, we just don't have the resources for it. And that's not a way to ingrain ourselves into the market. Some of it is built on relationships, that I and my sales team have, relationships that are, long in the industry, of trust, of being able to produce something for them that really solves their problems. And they want somebody to deal with. They want somebody to come in and shake their hand, go out to the end customer with them, understand the end customer's problem, and not just be a very transactional type environment. They want to do something that's meaningful for them, meaningful for their customers, differentiates them, differentiates us. So that's why we kind of showed those pillars, right? We're going after 2 or 3 or 4, areas where we want to get really, really good at, and then expand on those with those particular customers. Because in the commercial and industrial spaces, a lot of those are the same customer, right? A lot of those are the same integrator that we're going after that may service an optical gas imaging, environment, also may, do flare stack monitoring. They may do some type of automation for industrial high process temperature monitoring and those types of things. So you get in on the ground, you help them differentiate themselves, making them be able to be competitive against their competitors, solve a problem for the end user, and then just continue to build on that with our product stack. Being able to be nimble is a huge part of that. Being able to just go to our Plano office, sit down with our engineers and say, this is what the industry needs. This is what they're looking for. This will help solve their problems. And then be the guy that has that and actually wants to listen to their input, puts us in a great position. You're not going to buy our product on Amazon.com. Like that's certainly not that's not the product offering that we're going after today. We're going after what I believe is an underserved portion of the market, where they're not getting everything they need to solve their problem. They're attempting to deal with it the best they can with an off-the-shelf solution. That's an entry point for sure. Absolutely. Yep. For sure. That's later down the road. That's part of a longer term strategy, building the company where there's a whole bunch more commas on the screen that me, Al, and Sam can talk about. But we're starting where we know we can get that really good growth, get our practices down properly, make a great name for ourselves, and deliver value to our customers. Thank you.
I guess you define the broader strategy here as you're sort of moving up market to be like that mid-tier systems integrator,
Yep.
like a FLIR or like a Lean or a DRS,
Yep.
where you're able to pair the optic with the thermal camera core and the actual like AI chip to do the onboard processing.
Yeah. And to repeat that, the question is, are we moving into sort of more mid-market where we're pairing the optics with the camera and the AI, and that's exactly it. And to supplement the previous question, which ties into that, there is no need immediately for a Me Too company. There is no need for someone to come out with another camera that's identical to the FLIR camera and just have another vendor there. Yeah, there might be some of that, but an entry point is really coming into where are the gaps, where are things missing. A market of furnace cameras, to be able to offer these furnace cameras at $30,000 instead of $120,000, you're creating a value to the customer, because with the same budget, he can buy 4 of those, and as Jason showed, look at 3 different places in the same power plant simultaneously. So, it's finding those areas where we create real values there. That opens the door. Down the road, sure, we are going to have the, bread and butter cameras and the ones that will be just repeating and in volume, but it's not the starting point. Okay. Any questions from online, or is that not an option? Only in person. Okay. So I think we're a wrap. Okay. So do you want to?
Thank you, everyone. That concludes today's webcast. You may now disconnect.